Hey guys, welcome to Juicy Tea, where I read out the best stories on Reddit, so you don't have to. The funny, shocking, and satisfyingly juicy. Manager gets me fired, doesn't realize there's a paper trail, posted by Powder Toe Supreme. I worked as a writer and editor for over a decade, and in that time, I had my fair share of bad bosses, like anyone. But there was one that completely takes the cake. I worked for a large media company that had dealings with a number of other companies, ranging from publishing to fashion to sport to tech. You name it, they did it. How a writing department worked was each writer had specific areas that they would write for, kind of how like journals have beats they cover. So if you were assigned to the fashion arm of the company, you wrote and edited everything for that arm. I worked for this company for about a year and a half before a new manager was hired. Part of her job was to update our internal style guide when necessary. For those that don't know, a style guide is a reference document for how to either refer to things or how to format things for a company. Before her tenure as manager, this was only done once, maybe twice a year, and the changes were relatively minimal, since the style guide was very well established in the company and had been in place for a number of years. However, after she came on, it was being updated at least once a week, if not multiple times a week. It legitimately became an obsession for her. Aside from the general annoyance of keeping up with it, it didn't take long for me and my coworkers to reach the conclusion that our new manager didn't have the faintest idea what she was doing. Each new version had more and more glaring errors. At first, we ignored these changes, giving her the benefit of the doubt and hoping, perhaps naively, that these new directives were mistakes. That was until people started getting reprimanded for not following the style guide. I was the first one to get the one-on-one closed-door talk. One of the departments I wrote for was sports. She had seen how I hadn't been following the new rule of how I was supposed to refer to men's and women's teams. Truthfully, I had willfully ignored it, hoping that it was just a mistake. But to my horror, it appeared that my new writing manager didn't understand basic grammar. You see, the change she implemented removed the apostrophe from men's and women's, for example, in men's basketball. Her rationale was that the men didn't own the team, therefore it should not be possessive. Apparently her understanding of the English language didn't evolve past grade school explanations. I was honestly pretty dumbfounded at first. But once I got over the initial shock that the manager of our department didn't realize that men's was not a word, I tried to bleakly explain that men is already plural, and that a possessive S doesn't always denote direct ownership, i.e. men's bathroom. She stared blankly at me for a few seconds, and for the briefest of moments, I thought that maybe, I was starting to see the cogs in her head turn. But no. She doubled down. Realizing the fight was lost, I told her that I would implement the changes going forward. Now, here's where my malicious compliance comes in. We worked for and with some very high-profile companies, and mistakes were not tolerated for things that were outward-facing. Realizing her idiocy could cost me my job, I made a very simple request. Could you please email me the exact style guide rule you're referencing, and how exactly you'd like me to implement it, with examples of where I messed up. She looked at me like I was stupid for not understanding what was being asked of me, but she still wrote it all down and emailed it to me. I also made sure any further style changes were referenced in an email and specifically asked that if there were any further changes, to please cite how I had done them in the past, along with how she'd like them to be done in the future. Sure enough, within the next 6 months, I was fired. At my exit interview, I handed HR a folder containing every bit of written communication regarding the style changes, along with quite a bit of evidence that she was passing off her projects to other members of the department and changing people's work behind their back. She was fired 3 months after me, along with our department director 3 months after that. Turns out, my little folder sparked a full investigation by HR. And after interviewing other coworkers, they realized that she'd done it to have the grounds to fire people she didn't like. I just happened to be the first on the chopping block. The project she was passing off to other people, she was taking the credit for what they were doing to make herself look good. and those changes she was making to other people's work? HR realized that she was changing things to make it explicitly incorrect. Gotta love software that tracks changes and timestamps and lists the user. On top of all of this, they also discovered that she had, at best, exaggerated, and at worst, fabricated most of her resume. By the time she was fired, I'd already found another job in a different department at the same company. It was a good gig, and my new manager wasn't a complete moron. Eventually, I moved on from that company, but if anything, my time there taught me a very valuable lesson. Document, 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 and document some more. Down in the comments, DNA is just neutered RNA says, always ask for the email, and you must take actions to prepare for when they cut your email access. Don't be this guy. My boss is corrupt, and I have email proof. Show me the email. I can't. They fired me and cut my email access. Yep, always get it in writing, and make sure they can't restrict your access to the proof. You wanted 0 idle time in Teams? Okay, we can do that. Posted by the Lightning Count 1. This story is from a few years ago. It's how I helped my sister, and somehow got her company to willingly bypass their own idle time requirements. Her company went work from home after the lockdown and stayed working from home. At first, they required an always-on-camera system, but that quickly went away as the amount of unintended nudity that comes from your average household is quite startling. Then they went to a system that tracks your idle time in Teams. The amount of write-ups, meetings, group meetings, and eventual terminations for what was the dumbest requirement ever caused my sister to ask for help. She sent me an Amazon link for one of those UBS sticks that jiggles the mouse. I told her, don't use those, as even the laziest IT can detect them. At the time, Amazon wasn't selling mechanical mouse turners yet, or at least, not at a reasonable price, so I looked at building one. I found an STL file for this flowery mouse holder, which I modified to be just straight monocolored, and 3D printed it. I cut out a 1.5-inch circular disc and put it on a weak motor. I then connected it to a power source through a USB. I set the wheel to spin every 1 to 12 seconds for a total of 2 to 5 seconds at a time, but ran into an issue. Sometimes the disc spinning wouldn't actually move the mouse. I found a company that would print stickers at $1 a sticker, so I found this basic pattern of squares and lines crisscrossing each other and had it printed to just under the dimensions of the disc. I stuck it on there and the mouse turner worked perfectly. But I quickly ran into another issue. Since the disc was raised, it quickly got hung up on the mouse with a sticker. So back into design I went. I made it so the dimensions were slightly larger for the base and sat it where the disc would be 2mm below the actual mouse. After printing it, the mouse sat on the cradle and the disc spun without touching. When the disc spun, the mouse cursor would just randomly move in weird directions. So with all that out of the way, I got my free lunch out of my sister and delivered it. It hooked into a laptop's UPS port, undetected, and would move her cursor, decreasing her idle time down to 0. Within 2 weeks, she was recognized as a top performer. She was watching crime dramas with her volume at maximum until she got a notification that a customer submitted a request. In other words, her productivity remained exactly the same. So my sister called me up and asked if I could make more of those. Thankfully, I'd saved the STL files and could order more stickers if needed. I told her I could make each one for $25. The cheapest on Amazon at the time were like $50, and it only cost me roughly $12 to make them, which went down to about $8 by the end. She said several coworkers had asked her about it and should just give them my number. Within a month, I had sold 32 mechanical mouse turners. Then, one weekend, I got a call from the CEO of the company. You see, all of his workers were using these mouse turners, and he wasn't. So, when the company published the report on idle times, his was abysmally low. That phone call was one of the most surreal phone calls I've ever had. At first he thought I was one of his employees. I told him that I wasn't, that I worked for a waste management company. I don't, but I wasn't about to tell him that. He asked me about the mouse turners. I told him that I designed them for a friend, but that person no longer works for his company. Again, lies. I was protecting my sister. Not like he couldn't figure it out anyway, but still. He then asked if he could get one. This is where the conversation became very weird. I tried to convince him to give up the idle time requirements, as it clearly wasn't important and only hurt his company. I laid out all of my points and pointed out that even he, the CEO of the company, is buying a device specifically designed to bypass his own requirement. But he wouldn't budge. He was so into his company dogma that he just wanted one from me. I had a few left over, so I told him I could make him one for $35. Now, here's the really screwed up part of the story. He asked for a full list of my clients. He promised that no one would be fired, he just wanted to know how many there were. I told him that the list wouldn't be necessary, as every single one of his employees had bought one, literally all 32, excluding him. His response was to have the company reimburse the employees the $25 they'd paid, and set it up where his company would purchase a device from me each time a new employee was hired. So, first the company set idle time requirements, which then caused issues at the company. Now the company buys devices for each employee, so they can bypass their own idle timer. Corporate logic at its finest. Congrats! You've solved the problem that you created in the first place, by costing the company even more money. Initially I thought OP's sister was being a bit silly by telling her coworkers about the device. Like, what if they reported her? But hey, apparently everyone at that company is cool. Even the CEO. It's just whoever's in charge of making those dumb policies. Probably the board or something. If you liked this video, please let me know, and subscribe for more juicy tea.